Imagine this. You're in a world where the actual law, the legal system, demands one thing from you. But then there's this other code, maybe unwritten, but just as powerful, demanding something totally different. What happens then? Especially when following the actual law means, well, breaking that unspoken code, where does loyalty even lie? Today, we're really diving deep into a case that perfectly highlights this friction. It's the whole situation with rapper Troy Ave and podcaster Stone, stemming from that tragic shooting back in 2016 at Irving Plaza. And this isn't just some dry legal case study. It's honestly a fascinating look at how the justice system bumps up against and sometimes really clashes with street culture, hip-hop culture. So our mission here is to unpack the key events, look at the very different legal tactics both sides used, and get into that huge public debate that blew up afterwards, especially around the whole idea of snitching. We'll look at the specific documents, the actions that really poured fuel on that fire, and try to figure out what it tells us about loyalty, law, and how things are perceived.
Yeah, and what's so interesting and what we really want you to get is how this one single violent night became like a lightning rod. It wasn't just about the legal case itself. It sparked these much bigger conversations within a very specific community. We're going to try and connect the dots, between the legal moves lawyers make and the huge, sometimes really damaging cultural impact those moves can have. It's about understanding not just what the law said they had to do, but why the reaction was so intense, especially for people living by a different kind of code.
Okay, so it all starts with a really tragic event. Back in 2016, Irving Plaza in New York City, there's some kind of altercation before a concert, and it explodes into a shooting, just horrific. And tragically, Troy Ave's bodyguard, Ronald Banga McFadder, was killed. That moment caught on camera too. It kicked off this huge legal mess that eventually pulled in both Troy Ave and Stone.
Absolutely. That night wasn't just, a crime scene. It was really the starting point for this incredibly long, complicated, and very emotionally charged story. It immediately set things in motion, pushing both of them down these paths where everything they did would be judged, not just by the courts, but by this whole culture with its own pretty rigid set of rules.
Yeah.
Every single step after that point carried like double the weight.
Right. Okay, let's unpack Troy Ave's side first, because that's where one of the main tensions really comes into play. Fast forward to 2023, Troy Ave does something significant. He testifies in court about what happened that night. Legally, maybe necessary, but culturally, His story was basically about a violent fight with Stone, claiming he was wrestling for a gun, and that struggle led to his bodyguard being shot.
And it's really crucial to understand the legal spot Troy Ave was in. I mean, he was a victim of the shooting, yes, but also a key witness to what went down. So his testimony, it was legally compelled. He got a subpoena. If he refused, he could face contempt charges, serious legal trouble, completely separate from the shooting itself. So from a purely legal angle, testifying wasn't really a choice he could easily make. It was an obligation central to the prosecution's case.
And this is where it gets really wild and kind of heartbreaking, even though he was legally required to testify. The reaction from parts of the hip-hop community was overwhelming, just furious criticism. He got labeled a snitch, loud and clear. And this is where that cultural friction just smacks you in the face. Think about this contradiction, right? Someone in our sources pointed it out perfectly. Troy Avenue did what you would think the street would respect. They killed his friend and he shot back. But because he got on the stand, it changed everything. How does that even compute? Defending yourself, seeking justice for your friend, shouldn't that be respected? But testifying flips it.
That observation, it cuts right to the heart of this cultural divide we're talking about. Within certain codes, certain parts of street culture, hip-hop culture, seeking justice outside the community, especially by cooperating with police, by testifying in court. That's often seen as the bigger crime, a much bigger betrayal than the original violence. It's seen as breaking ranks, violating this deep code of silence, of handling things internally, even if that means violence. So the paradox is stark, isn't it? You might get props for defending yourself, but you get condemned for involving the system, a system that many in that community deeply distrust anyway. The method of seeking accountability becomes the issue, not the self-defense itself.
Wow. Okay, so while Troy Ave is dealing with that fallout, Stone's legal team, they're going in a totally different direction. And that sparked its own firestorm. His defense strategy involved, filing motions, submitting letters, basically trying to point the finger back at Troy Ave. These weren't just vague hints either. They argued Troy Ave had a history of violent behavior, was involved in other incidents, things they claimed could explain his character, his possible motives that night.
And if you look at that just through a legal lens, these kinds of moves are pretty standard. Tagstone's lawyers were doing their job. They were trying to undermine the credibility of the prosecution's main witness, who was Troy Ave, and maybe shift some blame. In our legal system, it's adversarial, right? Both sides try to poke holes in the other's story. Questioning the other side's key witness, their character, that's a common tactic. It's not always about proving your client is innocent. Sometimes it's just about creating reasonable doubt or painting the events in a different light.
But then there was this one document, a specific letter that just blew everything up. It turned what might have been a standard legal filing into this huge public drama. It was a letter from Tagstone's lawyer, Ken Montgomery, sent to the judge, Judge Lorna Schofield. And this wasn't just dry legal stuff. The details in it, once they got out, sparked this massive debate about loyalty, ethics, snitching, everything within the hip-hop world. So the letter was trying to argue for Tagstone to get bail. It said he wasn't a flight risk, meaning, he wasn't likely to run off. To back that up, it mentioned his stable income from hosting the Tax Season podcast, argued he'd made positive life changes. Standard bail arguments, maybe, but then, crucially, it pivoted. It directly questioned why Troy Ave was out on bail, even though he faced serious charges and was on video with a gun. It also stressed that Tagstone, at that point, didn't have homicide or assault charges. And it made a point saying both his and Troy Ave's DNA were on the gun, yet only Troy Ave was free. It even had this quote trying to paint a picture of redemption. After several mistakes in his life, Mr. Campbell has made efforts to change his life around and seek redemption through his occupation as a podcaster and music and entertainment insider.
Yeah, that letter is such a perfect example of how a legal document written for one audience, the judge gets read completely differently by another, the public, the culture. Legally, every point was strategic. Show positive changes, show stability so he's not a flight risk, point out what seems like unfairness compared to the other guy involved. Mentioning the DNA. That's a factual detail from the investigation, relevant legally. It's a lawyer building a case for why their client should be released pending trial. Just doing the job.
Okay, so what does this all boil down to? This is really the core of it, isn't it? These totally clashing views on snitching, seen through a legal lens versus a cultural one. You've got these two guys, Troy Ave, Tagstone, both navigating the legal system in ways that, maybe from the outside, seem logical, even necessary. But inside their world, within that community context, those same actions took on these explosive, highly charged meanings.
From that purely legal viewpoint, like we said, filing a defense letter, arguing for bail, trying to discredit a witness, that's all just standard practice. It's how the system works. In Troy Ave's testimony, legally required. Refusing wasn't really an option without facing more charges. These are fundamental parts of our adversarial justice system. The system expects you to fight your case, question the other side. It's not built to factor in unwritten street codes. Its focus is the law, the procedure.
Right. But culturally, many people saw the public nature of Tagstone's legal arguments, especially the details in that letter, as a huge violation of street codes. They equated it directly to snitching. The specifics, Tagstone's income, questioning Troy Ave's bail, bringing up the DNA in a court document, people saw that as breaking loyalty. It looked like Tagstone was cooperating, putting information out there that could hurt Troy Ave, even if the intent was just his own legal defense. There was even that video going around, right, showing people debating if that specific letter crossed the line, a cultural line you just don't cross. It really captured that tension between legal defense and street perception. It shows how using the legal system can itself be seen as the betrayal.
And it raises another point, doesn't it? Troy Ave's testimony was compelled, yes, but his public statements afterwards, his media appearances, how he presented himself as the victim, you could argue that also kind of blurred the lines, maybe unintentionally, between being a victim seeking justice and being an informant in some people's eyes. It fueled the debate more. So if we look at the analysis, the purpose of Tagstone's letter legally, clear. Argue for bail, for leniency, use his job, his supposed changes, the case facts. But culturally, it was seen as airing dirty laundry in public, using the system against someone else from the same world. And the content, like the DNA facts or the bail comparison, legally relevant arguments, culturally, seen as undermining loyalty, basically cooperating with the ops by giving them info. It's this total disconnect between legal strategy and cultural meaning. Just devastating.
It really is. This whole case, because it involves people who are so public, it just powerfully highlights the complexities, the legal process itself, and that incredibly tricky balance between what the law says you must do and what your personal ethics or your community's ethics say you should do. It's not just theory. It's a real, visceral example of how legal moves can crash right into these deep cultural codes, often with destructive results. It makes you face this reality that an action totally normal, even required in one system, can be seen as the ultimate betrayal in another.
And what's so tough, I think, is trying to manage public perception when all these lines, personal actions, legal strategies, cultural rules get tangled up together. It really shows how understanding something isn't just about knowing the facts in one context, like the legal one. You need to grasp the cultural context, too, to see why those facts land the way they do. Otherwise, you're missing a huge piece of the story. This case just lays that complexity bare.
Yeah, it's a really sharp example of just how intricate things get in these high-profile cases. It's a reminder that there are often, multiple ways to see the same events, all potentially valid depending on the lens you're using. And today, with social media and everything, those interpretations can become rock-solid beliefs very quickly, no matter what the legal technicalities actually are.
This case really forces you to think, doesn't it? About how different groups, legal professionals maybe, versus artists, versus people in specific neighborhoods, how they even define basic concepts like justice and loyalty. It shows that what's just a standard legal move, maybe like a chess piece on a board in the courtroom, can feel like a profound betrayal, like declaring war in another context. And because Troy Ave and Taxstone are public figures, that clash just got amplified for everyone to watch and argue about.
So, as you think about this deep dive, maybe consider this question. In a world where information travels instantly and everyone's got an opinion, how much does your actual intent matter? Especially when the perception of what you did can have such huge, lasting consequences. And where's the line? When is fighting for your freedom, using the legal tools available, justified if it means breaking an unwritten code that holds a whole community together? We hope this deep dive gave you some things to think about, maybe some surprising angles on this whole tangled mess of law, loyalty, and public opinion. Until next time, keep digging deeper.